The heart monitor was the only sound in the room, counting down the seconds of Heine's life. She was 7 months pregnant, lying in a hospital bed, her body failing her. She looked at her husband, Marcus, hoping for a hand to hold. Instead, Marcus checked his diamond Rolex side and placed divorce papers on her chest. "I have a business to run, Heine. I can't be a widower before I'm a billionaire. It's bad for the stock price." He walked out, leaving her to die alone with their unborn twins. But Marcus made one fatal mistake. He didn't check who was standing in the hallway, and he certainly didn't expect his greatest rival, Julian Sterling, to walk into that room and change everything. The rain battered against the reinforced glass of the VIP suite at St. Jude's Medical Center in Seattle. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and expensive lilies, flowers sent by business associates who cared more about appearances than the woman fading away in the bed. Hinnie Thorne, once the envy of the city's socialite circle, looked small against the stark white sheets. Her skin was translucent, the blue veins beneath visible and fragile. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. The doctors had called it peripartum cardiomyopathy, pregnancy-induced heart failure. Her heart, broken in more ways than one, was struggling to pump blood for 3 herself and the twin boys growing inside her. Standing at the foot of the bed was Marcus Thorne. He didn't look like a grieving husband. He looked like he was preparing for a board meeting. His navy bespoke suit from Savile Row was immaculate. His hair was gelled back, not a strand out of place. He was typing furiously on his BlackBerry, his brow furrowed not with worry but with annoyance. "Marcus," Heine whispered. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping together. Marcus held up a finger, silencing her. "Hold on. The merger with Omnicorp is stalling. Sophia is incompetent handling the press." "The babies," Heine tried again, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen stomach. "The doctor said, if my heart stops." Marcus finally slipped the phone into his pocket and spewed a heavy, theatrical exhalation that filled the quiet room. He walked to the side of the bed, but he didn't take her hand. Instead, he picked up a manila envelope that had been resting on the side table. "Heine, we need to be realistic," Marcus said, his tone smooth, practiced. It was the voice he used to close deals. "Dr. Evans says your probability of survival through the night is less than 10%. Even if they do an emergency C-section, the trauma would likely kill you." "I know," she wept softly. "I'm scared, Marcus. Stay with me, please. Just until the end." Marcus looked at his watch again. "I can't. I have the gala at the Met tonight. If I don't show up, the investors get jittery. Stock drops. You know how it works." Hinnie stared at him, the realization hitting her harder than the heart failure. "You're leaving now." "I'm not just leaving, Heine. I'm securing my future." He tapped the envelope on her chest. "These are divorce papers, signed and notarized." Heine felt a sharp pain in her chest, sharper than the disease. "What?" "It's purely strategic," Marcus said, coldly adjusting his silk tie. "If you die as my wife, your medical debt and the complications with your family's estate attach to me. It's messy. If we are divorced, I am legally clear. I've already spoken to the hospital board. They won't kick you out, but I've removed my credit cards from the file, effective midnight." "And the children?" Heine gasped, tears streaming down her face. "Your sons?" Marcus's face twisted in a sneer of distaste. "If they survive, which is unlikely given your weak genetics, they'll be burdens. I need an heir, Heine, not an anchor. Sophia is waiting in the car. She's healthy. She's suitable. He leaned in not to kiss her, but to whisper one last cruelty. Do me a favor. Don't drag this out. It's unbecoming. Marcus turned on his heel, the expensive leather of his shoes clicking rhythmically against the linoleum floor. He didn't look back. He opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the corridor. Heine let out a wail of pure despair, a sound that should have shattered the windows. She clutched the sheets, her heart fluttering wildly on the monitor. Beep, 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 beep. She was going to die, and she was going to die discarded like a used wrapper. Out in the hallway, Marcus adjusted his cuffs. He felt a presence before he saw it. Leaning against the wall, dressed in a charcoal-grey trench coat that cost more than most people's houses, was a man Marcus hated more than anyone on earth. Julian Sterling. Julian was everything Marcus wasn't. Where Marcus was loud and flashy, Julian was violent and lethal. He owned Sterling Industries, the conglomerate that had been swallowing Marcus's market share piece by piece. Julian had dark hair, eyes the color of cold steel, and a reputation for being absolutely ruthless. "Leaving so soon, Thorne?" Julian asked. His voice was a low rumble, calm but dangerous. Marcus sneered. "Visiting hours are over, Sterling. What are you doing here, looking to buy the hospital?" "Maybe," Julian said, pushing himself off the wall. He towered over Marcus. "Or maybe I just wanted to see if the rumors were true, that you're actually a man without a soul." "She's dying," Marcus said dismissively, waving a hand toward the door. "Business doesn't stop for death. You of all people should know that." "There is business," Julian said, stepping closer, his eyes narrowing. "And then there is being a monster. You just served divorce papers to a woman on her deathbed. How do you—" Marcus started, then scoffed. "Spying on me. It doesn't matter. She's history. The twins won't make it. I'm cutting my losses. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a gala to attend. Try not to catch whatever weakness she has." Marcus shouldered past Julian and headed for the elevators. He felt light, unburdened. He was free. Julian watched him go. He waited until the elevator doors dinged and closed. Then the cold, ruthless mask dropped from Julian Sterling's face. For the first time in years, he looked terrified. He turned and pushed open the door to Heine's room. The alarms were blaring. Nurses were rushing in. "Code Blue!" a nurse shouted. "Her pressure is bottoming out!" Julian didn't wait for permission. He strode into the room, his presence commanding the chaos to halt for a split second. He moved to the bedside, grabbing Heine's cold, trembling hand. "Heine," Julian said, his voice breaking. "Heine, look at me." Her eyes fluttered open. They were glassy, unfocused. She saw the dark figure and flinched. "Marcus?" "No," Julian said firmly. "It's Julian. I'm here." "He left," she whispered, her energy fading rapidly. "He left us." "I know," Julian said, gripping her hand tighter. "But I haven't, and I never will." He turned to the lead doctor, Dr. Evans, who was preparing a defibrillator. "Stop. Sir, you need to leave. She is crashing," Dr. Evans yelled. "I said stop!" Julian roared the authority in his voice, silencing the room. "She doesn't need a shock. She needs a transfer. My helicopter is on the roof. I have Dr. Alistair Kane from Zurich on video call right now. We are moving her to the Sterling Private Institute." "She won't survive the transport," the nurse argued. Julian looked down at Heine. Her eyes were closing. He leaned close to her ear. Heine, listen to me. You have to fight. Not for Marcus, for the twins, and for me. I made a promise to your father before he died that I would watch over you. I failed once. I won't fail tonight. Heine's heart monitor slowed to a dangerous rhythm. Beep, beep. Do it, Julian ordered the medical team. Move her. If she dies, this hospital closes tomorrow. The world believed Hinnie Thorne died that night at St. Jude's. The obituary was brief paid for by Marcus's assistant. It stated that Heine had passed away from unforeseen complications and that the funeral would be private. In reality, there was no funeral. There was no body. Marcus, consumed by his merger and his new life with Sophia, didn't even bother to ask for the death certificate. He assumed the hospital had handled the disposal. He was too busy drinking champagne at the Met Gala, celebrating his new bachelor status and the 15% hike in his stock value. But 4,000 miles away, in a secluded state-of-the-art medical facility, nestled in the snowy peaks of the Swiss Alps, a battle was raging. It had been 3 weeks since the night at the hospital. Julian Sterling stood behind the observation glass, his arms crossed, his eyes rimmed with red. He hadn't slept properly in 20 days. She is stabilizing Mr. Sterling, Dr. Alistair Kane said, walking up beside him. Kane was the best cardiologist in the world, a man Julian paid $10 million a year to keep on retainer. And the twins? Julian asked, his gaze never leaving the figure in the bed, hooked up to a maze of machines. Miraculously, they are holding on, Kane said, checking his chart. We have her on a specialized ECMO machine that is supporting her heart and lungs, allowing the babies to grow without draining her remaining energy. But we have to deliver them soon. Tomorrow via C-section. It's risky. Do whatever it takes, Julian said. Save them all. I don't care what it costs. The next morning was the longest of Julian's life. He sat in the waiting room of his own private clinic, the silence of the mountains deafening. He thought back to 10 years ago. Few people knew that Julian had known Heine long before she met Marcus. They had been interns together at a law firm in London. Julian, the quiet, brooding heir who wanted to make it on his own, and Heine, the bright, kind-hearted girl who brought coffee for the security guards. He had loved her then silently, but he had been called back to New York to save his father's company, and by the time he returned, she had fallen for the charismatic, charming Marcus Thorne. Julian had stepped back. He thought Marcus would make her happy. He had been wrong. The double doors swung open. Dr. Kane stepped out, pulling off a surgical mask. He looked exhausted. Julian stood up, his heart hammering against his ribs. Well? Dr. Kane smiled. A genuine, tired smile. 2 boys, premature but fighters. They are in the NICU. And Heine. She flatlined twice on the table. Kane admitted gravely. Julian's blood ran cold. But we brought her back. She's in a coma, Julian. Her heart is very weak. She may never wake up. And if she does, the road to recovery will be years, not months. She'll wake up, Julian said, his voice filled with absolute conviction. I'll wait. 3 years later, the Sterling estate in the Hamptons was a fortress. Surrounded by high hedges and private security, it was a sanctuary away from the prying eyes of New York City. On the sprawling green lawn, 2 toddlers with curly dark hair were chasing a golden retriever. They were fast, loud, and full of life. Leo Sam, be careful near the roses, a voice called out. Heine sat on the patio, a cashmere blanket draped over her legs. She looked different than the dying woman in the hospital. Her cheeks had color, her eyes were bright, but there was a new steeliness in her gaze. The softness of her youth had been replaced by the resilience of a survivor. She sipped her herbal tea, watching her sons, Leo and Sam. They had Marcus's dark hair, but they had her eyes. And they had Julian's protection. The glass door slid open and Julian stepped out. He had graying temples now, a sign of the stress of running an empire and a secret family. He carried a tablet in his hand. "You're supposed to be resting," Julian said gently, sitting opposite her. "I rested for a year in a coma, Julian. I'm done resting," Hinny replied, offering him a small smile. "Is that the report?" Julian nodded. He placed the tablet on the table. "Marcus is planning to launch his new tech venture, Thorn AI, next month. He's leveraged everything. His real estate, his existing company, even his offshore accounts. He needs this IPO to work, or he's bankrupt." Heine picked up the tablet. On the screen was a photo of Marcus and Sophia. They looked glamorous, smiling for the cameras. Sophia was wearing a necklace Heine recognized. It had been her grandmother's. Marcus had kept it. "He looks happy," Heine said, her voice devoid of warmth. "He looks arrogant," Julian corrected. "He thinks you're dead, Heine. He thinks the boys died with you. He has no idea that the anonymous investor buying up his debt for the last 2 years is me." Heine looked at the boys playing in the grass. "He threw us away, Julian. He left his sons to die because they were inconvenient. I know. I don't just want to survive anymore," Hinny said, looking up at Julian. The gratitude she felt for this man was overwhelming, but it had grown into something else. A partnership, a shared fire. "I want to take back what belongs to my children. I want to destroy him." Julian leaned back, a dark smirk playing on his lips. "I was hoping you'd say that. That's why I brought you this." He slid a black folder across the table. Heine opened it. It was a legal document. "What is this?" "A job offer," Julian said. "Sterling Industries needs a new vice president of operations for the European division. But more importantly, we need a face for our hostile takeover of Thorn Enterprises, someone who knows Marcus's weaknesses, someone who can walk into a boardroom and make him freeze in terror." Hinny ran her finger over the paper. "He thinks I'm a ghost." "Then let's haunt him," Julian whispered. "The Global Tech Summit is in 2 weeks. Marcus is the keynote speaker. He's going to unveil his new company. I think it's time the world met the new Hinny Vance." Heine closed the folder. She looked at her sons, then at the man who had saved them. She stood up, the blanket falling away. She wasn't weak anymore. She was a mother, and she was a weapon. "No," Hinny said, her eyes flashing with dangerous intent. "Not Heine Vance. Put my name on the papers as Hinny Sterling." Julian looked at her, stunned. "Heine, are you sure people will talk?" "Let them talk," she said, reaching out to straighten his tie, a gesture of intimacy that surprised them both. He left his wife to die. It's only fair his rival returns with his widow. Let's go to war, Julian. The transformation of Heine Thorn into Heine Sterling did not happen overnight. It was a calculated, grueling metamorphosis that took place behind the high walls of a chateau in the south of France, far away from the prying eyes of the American press. Julian didn't just give her a new wardrobe. He gave her a new arsenal. "Marcus plays dirty," Julian told her one evening in the library, pouring 2 glasses of aged cognac. "He uses leverage, blackmail, and media manipulation. If you want to beat him, you can't just be the scorned wife. You have to be a predator." For 6 months, Hinny underwent a rigorous education. She didn't just learn about the tech industry, She dissected Marcus's entire business model. She studied his financial filings, identified the shell companies he used to hide debt, and memorized the names of every board member he had secretly betrayed. She learned to walk not with the tentative steps of a heartbreak victim, but with the rhythmic, terrifying grace of a woman who owns the room. But the hardest part was the name. To make the Hinnie Sterling identity bulletproof, they had to make it legal. It was a Tuesday morning in a small private chapel in Lyon. No guests, just a judge and 2 witnesses. Hinnie wore a simple white suit, sharp and tailored. Julian wore black. "This is strictly for protection," Julian said, as they stood before the officiant. He looked at her, his steel-grey eyes unreadable. "As my wife, you have immunity. You have access to my entire legal team. And if Marcus tries to claim the twins, he'll have to go through the most powerful estate lawyers in Europe." "I know," Hinnie replied, her voice steady. But as he slid the ring onto her finger, a massive emerald-cut diamond that dwarfed the modest band Marcus had once given her, her hand trembled. "You're shaking," Julian whispered. "I'm not scared of the marriage," she whispered back. "I'm scared that I might actually enjoy seeing him suffer." Julian smirked, squeezing her hand. "That's not fear, Heine. That's ambition." Back at the estate, the twins Leo and Sam, now energetic 3-year-olds, were the only ones who saw the softness behind the new armor. They adored Julian. To them he was Papa J, the man who built them Lego castles and taught them how to swim. They had no memory of Marcus Thorne. The night before the Global Tech Summit in New York, Julian found Heine on the balcony, looking out at the French Riviera. "The jet leaves in 2 hours," he said. Heine turned. She looked breathtaking. Her hair, once long and wavy, was now cut into a sharp, chic bob that framed her face. Her makeup was flawless. She looked like a queen on a chessboard. "Is everything in place?" she asked. "The trap is set," Julian confirmed. "Marcus thinks he is walking into a coronation. He believes his new AI software, Thorn Mind, will secure his legacy. He doesn't know that the core algorithm of his software infringes on a patent held by a shell company, a company you now own." Hinnie smiled, a cold, satisfied curve of her lips. "And Sophia?" "She'll be there," Julian said, "parading around as the future Mrs. Thorne. The tabloids say they are planning a wedding for the spring." "Perfect," Heine said, picking up her clutch. "Let's go crash a party." The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City was dripping with crystals and gold. This was the event of the decade. Every tech giant, venture capitalist, and media mogul was in attendance. The air buzzed with the hum of billions of dollars in net worth. At the center of it all was Marcus Thorne. He looked older than he had 3 years ago. The stress of maintaining his empire was showing in the lines around his eyes, but his arrogance remained untouched. He stood by the champagne tower holding court with a group of Japanese investors. Clinging to his arm was Sophia. She was beautiful in a conventional, flashy way, wearing a red sequined dress that screamed for attention. She laughed too loudly at Marcus's jokes, constantly checking to see if the photographers were capturing her good side. "The Thorn Mind AI is revolutionary," Marcus was boasting. "It predicts market trends before they happen. It's going to make all Omnicorp look like a lemonade stand." "It sounds incredible, Marcus," one investor said, "but we heard rumors that Sterling Industries is making a surprise announcement tonight." Marcus scoffed, taking a sip of his drink. "Julian." "Please. Julian Sterling hasn't made a bold move in years. He's been hiding away in Europe, probably losing his touch. I heard he got married to some European heiress just to secure a merger. He's boring." Suddenly, the chatter in the room died down. The hush started at the entrance and rippled through the crowd like a wave. The heavy double doors swung open. Julian Sterling walked in. He looked impeccable in a black velvet tuxedo, but no one was looking at him. All eyes were on the woman on his arm. She wore a dress of midnight blue silk that clung to her body like liquid water. It was backless, daring, and elegant. Diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. She walked with her head high, her gaze sweeping the room with an air of absolute boredom. Marcus froze. His champagne glass tilted dangerously in his hand. "Who is that?" Sophia asked, narrowing her eyes jealously. Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't breathe. The woman looked familiar. The curve of the jaw, the shape of the eyes. But it was impossible. Hinnie was dead. He had left her dying. This woman was vibrant, powerful, and radiating a cold, terrifying beauty. Julian guided the woman through the crowd, heading straight for the center of the room where Marcus stood. The sea of people parted for them. As they got closer, Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. It was her. But it wasn't her. This woman didn't have the timid posture of his late wife. She looked at him not with love, but with amusement. "Good evening, Marcus," Julian said, his voice smooth and carrying across the silent circle that had formed around them. Marcus stammered, his eyes locked on Heine. "Sterling, I didn't expect you." "Clearly." Julian smiled. "I'd like you to meet my wife, the co-CEO of Sterling Industries." Heine stepped forward. She extended a hand, her diamond ring, catching the light, blinding Marcus. "Hello, Mr. Thorne," she said. Her voice was the same, yet different, lower, devoid of the tremor that used to be there when he raised his voice. "I've heard so much about you." Marcus stared at her hand. He didn't take it. "Heine," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sophia gasped. "Heine, your dead wife. Don't be ridiculous." Hinnie laughed, a light, airy sound that sent shivers down Marcus's spine. "My name is Heine Sterling. I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else, though I'm told I have a common face." She withdrew her hand, dismissing him. "Julian tells me you're presenting some new software tonight. Thorn Mind. How quaint." Marcus felt like the room was spinning. You died. St. Jude's. The heart failure." "Mr. Thorne seems unwell," Hinnie said to the crowd, raising an eyebrow. "Perhaps the pressure of the IPO is getting to him?" Julian stepped in, placing a protective hand on Heine's lower back. "My wife is actually the head of our acquisitions department, Marcus. In fact, she's the one who authorized the purchase of the debt on your Seattle manufacturing plant last week." Marcus's head snapped up. "What, you bought my debt?" "We like to diversify," Heine said coolly. She leaned in closer just enough so only Marcus could hear. The scent of her perfume hit him. It was the same scent Hinnie used to wear. Jasmine and vanilla. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the man who thinks he's invincible," she whispered, her eyes locking onto his with a ferocity that stopped his heart. "I look forward to watching your presentation. I hope there are no technical difficulties." She pulled back and smiled at Sophia. "Lovely dress, dear. A bit bright for the season, but brave." With that, Hinnie turned her silk dress swishing around her ankles and walked away, Julian at her side. Marcus stood there paralyzed. He was shaking. "Marcus," Sophia hissed, grabbing his arm. What is wrong with you? That's Julian's wife. Why did you call her Heine?" "It's her," Marcus muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I don't know how, but that's her." "Heine is dead," Sophia snapped. "You told me she died. You said you saw the papers. Marcus stopped. He realized he had never seen the death certificate. He had never seen the body. He had just walked away. A cold dread settled in his stomach, heavier than lead. He looked across the room. Heine was laughing with the CEO of Google sipping champagne. She looked alive. She looked dangerous, and she had just bought his debt. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, "please take your seats. The keynote presentation by Marcus Thorne will begin in 5 minutes." Marcus straightened his tie, but his hands were trembling. He had to go up on stage. He had to sell his company to the world. But all he could think about were the eyes of the woman in the midnight blue dress, watching him from the VIP table like a hawk waiting for a mouse to run. He walked toward the stage, unaware that the presentation loaded on the screen behind him had been subtly altered. Heine hadn't just come to scare him. She had come to burn him to the ground. The spotlight felt hotter than usual as Marcus Thorne stepped onto the stage. The applause was polite, but he could feel the tension in the room. The brief encounter with the woman who called herself Hinnie Sterling had rattled him to his core. He took a sip of water, his hand shaking slightly, and looked out at the sea of faces. In the front row, VIP section, sat Julian Sterling, looking calm and predatory. Next to him, the woman in blue was sipping her champagne, her eyes fixed on Marcus with an amused expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice slightly tighter than usual. "Welcome to the future. Today, Thorne Enterprises is proud to unveil Thorne Mind, an artificial intelligence autonomous enough to run a Fortune 500 company." He clicked the remote presenter in his hand. The massive screen behind him lit up with impressive graphics of soaring stock arrows and complex data streams. "For years, the market has been reactive." Marcus continued, finding his rhythm. He started to pace the stage, the arrogance slowly returning. "We wait for disasters, then we adjust. Thorne Mind changes that. It predicts. It secures. It is untouchable." Sophia, watching from the wings, smiled. He was pulling it off. "Let me show you the core architecture," Marcus said, turning to the screen. He clicked the remote again. Nothing happened. He clicked it again, harder. The beautiful blue and gold graphics remained frozen. A murmur went through the crowd. Marcus chuckled nervously. "Ah, technology. Even the future has glitches. One moment." He signaled frantically to the tech booth at the back of the room. Suddenly, the screen flickered violently. The soothing blue graphics disappeared. The screen went black for a terrifying second, and then a glaring blood-red background appeared. Giant white letters stretched across the 20-foot screen. "System failure. Unauthorized access detected." Marcus froze. "What is this? Cut the feed," he yelled at the sound technicians. But they couldn't. The screen shifted again. Now it was displaying lines of complex code. This isn't my presentation." Marcus stammered into the microphone, the sweat now visible on his forehead. From the VIP section, Julian Sterling leaned forward. "Actually, Marcus, it is." Julian's voice boomed, though he didn't have a microphone. The room went deathly silent. "That is the source code for Thorne Mind. It looks remarkably similar to the Project Chimera code that was stolen from Sterling Industries' R&D department 4 years ago. Wouldn't you agree?" The crowd gasped. Cameras started flashing furiously. "That's a lie," Marcus shouted, pointing a trembling finger at Julian. "You're sabotaging me because you're jealous." The screen changed again. The code vanished. In its place was a financial spreadsheet. It was ugly. It showed massive hemorrhaging debt. At the top of the spreadsheet in bold letters, Thorn Enterprises insolvent. Below it, a list of creditors. Every major bank Marcus owed money to was listed with "sold" stamped next to their names. Marcus stared at the screen, his jaw on the floor. He recognized those numbers. They were his secret shame, the massive loans he'd taken to fund his lavish lifestyle, and the stolen AI project. "As of 9:00 a.m. this morning," Julian said calmly, standing up and buttoning his jacket, "Sterling Industries has acquired 85% of Marcus Thorn's outstanding debt. We are now your majority creditor, Marcus, which means we own the building you are standing in, the suit you are wearing, and the stolen software you are trying to sell." The room erupted into chaos. Reporters were shouting questions. Investors were pulling out their phones, dumping Thorn stock before it hit zero. Marcus looked like a cornered animal. He looked towards Sophia in the wings for support, but she was already backing away, a look of absolute disgust on her face. Then the woman in blue stood up, Hinny. She didn't shout. She just waited. The aura of command she radiated was so strong that the room quieted down just to hear what she would say. A stagehand, mesmerized, handed her a microphone. She walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, looking up at the man she had once adored. "You said your AI predicts the future." "Marcus," Hinny said, her voice magnified through the speakers, smooth as silk but cold as ice. "Did it predict this?" Marcus stared down at her, his world collapsing. He was bankrupt, he was exposed as a thief, and the ghost of his dead wife was leading the execution. "Who are you?" he whispered into his lapel mic, the sound echoing tragically through the hall. Hinny smiled a terrifyingly beautiful smile. "I told you, I'm the woman who diversified your portfolio." She dropped the microphone. The sound of it hitting the floor was the final period on the end of Marcus Thorn's career. Julian offered Hinny his arm, and they walked out of the ballroom amidst the blinding flashes of cameras, leaving Marcus alone on stage under the merciless glare of the red screen. Marcus stumbled off the stage, blinded by the lights and the sudden crash of his ego. He pushed past cameramen and shouting reporters, fleeing down a service corridor toward the green rooms. He burst into his private dressing room, slamming the door and locking it. He leaned against it, gasping for air, his heart feeling like it might explode ironic. He thought wildly, considering how Hinny had died. Heine. It was impossible. He had seen the monitors flatline. He had seen the life leave her eyes. "Marcus!" Sophia pounded on the door from the outside. "Open up! You bastard! You ruined everything!" He ignored her. He needed a drink. He stumbled toward the minibar, grabbing a bottle of whiskey with shaking hands. He didn't hear the lock click open. He only realized he wasn't alone when he saw movement in the mirror above the vanity. He spun around, dropping the bottle. It shattered on the floor, the smell of expensive alcohol filling the small room. Julian was leaning against the doorframe, having used a master key. Heine walked past him into the room. Up close away from the ballroom lights, the resemblance was undeniable. It wasn't just a resemblance. It was her, the same small scar on her chin from a childhood fall, the same way her left eye twitched slightly when she was angry. "No." Marcus backed away until he hit the wall. "You're dead. I left you." "Yes, you did," Hinny said. Her voice was devoid of the theatrical performance she had put on in the ballroom. This was raw. This was real. You left me. 7 months pregnant, dying. You threw divorce papers on my chest because you didn't want my death to inconvenience your stock price. Heine, Marcus choked out. The reality hit him harder than the bankruptcy. How? The hospital. Julian bought the hospital, Hinnie said simply. He flew in a specialist team. They put me on life support. I was in a coma for a year, Marcus. A year lost in the dark, hearing nothing but the beep of machines. Marcus slid down the wall, sitting on the floor amidst the broken glass. He looked pathetic. Why didn't you tell me? Why let me believe? Why? Hinnie laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. Because you didn't care. You never asked for a death certificate. You never visited the grave. You were too busy celebrating with her. She gestured vaguely toward the door where Sophia had been screaming. Julian stepped forward, his presence filling the small room. She survived because she had something to fight for, something you forgot about. Marcus looked up confused through his panic. What? Hinnie reached into her small clutch purse. She pulled out her smartphone and tapped the screen. She turned the phone around and held it out to Marcus. On the screen was a professional photograph. It showed 2 identical little boys about 3 years old, laughing as they played in fall leaves. They had dark, curly hair and bright, intelligent eyes. They looked exactly like Marcus did in his own baby photos. Marcus stared at the phone. His breath hitched. He reached out a trembling hand to touch the screen, but Hinnie pulled it back sharply. "They're alive," Marcus whispered. Tears finally spilling from his eyes. Tears of shock, not redemption. "Their names are Leo and Sam," Hinnie said, her voice thick with emotion for the first time all night. "They were born via emergency C-section while I was on life support. They were 2 pounds each. Julian sat by their incubators every single night for 4 months while I lay in a coma next door." She glared down at Marcus with pure hatred. "You didn't just leave me to die, Marcus. You left them. Your sons." The weight of it crushed him. He had wanted an heir more than anything. And he had 2. Perfect, healthy sons. And they didn't even know he existed. "I want to see them," Marcus pleaded, trying to stand up. "Heine, please. They're my boys. I have rights." Julian moved incredibly fast. He grabbed Marcus by the lapels of his ruined tuxedo and slammed him back against the wall. "You have nothing," Julian snarled, his usual calm demeanor shattering. "You gave up your rights when you signed those divorce papers on her deathbed. You gave up your rights when you didn't bother to check if your children survived. I am their father on every piece of paper that matters. They call me Dad. To them, you are a stranger." Julian shoved him away with disgust. Hinnie stepped closer, looking down at the broken man on the floor, the man she had once loved enough to die for. "You wanted to be a billionaire, Marcus," Heine said quietly. "Now you're bankrupt. You wanted a trophy wife. Now she's leaving you. You wanted heirs. Now someone else is raising them." She turned away, unable to look at him any longer. "We're done here, Julian. Let the lawyers handle the rest." As they reached the door, Hinnie turned back one last time. "Oh, and Marcus' happy anniversary. Today would have been 5 years." They walked out, leaving the door open. Outside, the flashing lights of the paparazzi were waiting for the fallen king. The fall of Marcus Thorne did not happen in silence. It was a deafening, chaotic crash that echoed through every financial district in the world. But for Marcus, the noise stopped the moment the door to his dressing room clicked shut, leaving him alone with the wreckage of his life. The 48 hours following the global tech summit were a blur of flashing lights and aggressive shouting. He didn't leave the Plaza Hotel via the front entrance in a limousine. He was escorted out the back service exit by his lawyer, shielding his face from the paparazzi who were baying for blood. The headlines were already printed. Thorn of Lies, the bankruptcy of the century, the billionaire who stole the future. But the true humiliation began when he returned to the penthouse he could no longer afford. He found Sophia in the master bedroom. She wasn't crying. She wasn't pacing. She was packing. 4 Louis Vuitton trunks were open on the bed, filled with jewelry designer bags and the couture dresses he had bought her. "Sophia?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. He loosened his tie, the fabric feeling like a noose. "The lawyers say we can fight this. It's a setback, but if we liquidate the offshore accounts—" Sophia snapped a suitcase shut with a sharp click that sounded like a gunshot. She turned to him, her eyes cold and calculating. There was no love there. There never had been. There was only an appraisal of value, and Marcus's stock had just hit 0. "There is no we, Marcus," she said, picking up her phone to check her Uber Black status. "I read the filing. Julian Sterling owns 85% of your debt. He owns this apartment. He owns the furniture. He probably owns the shirt on your back. You're not a billionaire anymore. You're a liability." "I did this for us," Marcus shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. "I wanted to give you the world. You gave me a fraud," she spat back, brushing past him. She paused at the door, looking him up and down with a sneer of absolute disgust. "I can deal with a ruthless man, Marcus. I can't deal with a loser. Don't call me." The door slammed. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the city lights of Manhattan. Usually this view made him feel like a god. Now the city looked like a beast that had chewed him up and spat him out. 6 months later. The dismantling of the Thorn Empire was clinical and brutal. The auction was held on a Tuesday. Marcus wasn't allowed to attend, but he watched the live stream from the small, cramped studio apartment he was renting in Queens. He watched as the gavel banged down, selling his life piece by piece. His bespoke suits sold for pennies on the dollar. His vintage Ferrari collection sold to a collector in Dubai. The Patek Philippe watch he had been wearing when he served Heine divorce papers sold. But the cruelest twist came when the auctioneer announced the sale of the Thorn estate in the Hamptons. It was Marcus's pride and joy. "Sold," the auctioneer droned, "to Sterling Industries for land redevelopment." Marcus turned off the laptop. He sat in the dark, the glow of the streetlights filtering through the cheap blinds. He reached for a bottle of whiskey, but his hand stopped. He couldn't even afford the good stuff anymore. He was drinking bottom-shelf liquor that burned his throat and did nothing to numb the memories. He thought of the hospital room, the steady beep, beep, beep of the monitor. He thought of Hinnie's pale hand reaching for him. He thought of the twins, his twins. He had spent the last 6 months dealing with prosecutors and plea deals. His lawyer, a court-appointed defender, because he could no longer afford his shark legal team, had been blunt. "Plead guilty to securities fraud and grand larceny," the defender had said. "You get 5 years in minimum security, followed by 10 years of probation. You are pulled from serving as an officer of any public company for life. If you fight it, Julian Sterling's lawyers will bury you for 30 years. Marcus had signed the plea deal. He was due to surrender to the authorities at Rikers Island in 24 hours. He had 1 day left of freedom, and there was only one place he wanted to go. It was a crisp, golden afternoon in late October. Central Park was ablaze with colour burnt orange, deep crimson, and vibrant yellow leaves carpeted the grass. The air was biting a signal that winter was coming. Hinnie Sterling sat on a wrought iron bench near the great lawn. She was wrapped in a camel hair coat that looked soft and warm. A cashmere scarf was wound loosely around her neck. She looked radiant, not just wealthy, but healthy. Her skin glowed, her eyes were bright, and she held a cup of steaming hot chocolate in gloved hands. She was laughing. It was a genuine, throaty laugh that threw her head back. Next to her sat Julian. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was wearing dark jeans and a navy wool sweater, looking rugged and relaxed. He had one arm draped protectively along the back of the bench behind Heine. But Marcus, hiding behind the thick trunk of an old oak tree 50 yards away, wasn't looking at them. He was looking at the boys. Leo and Sam were 4 years old now. They were bundles of boundless energy dressed in matching puffy vests and denim jeans. They were kicking a soccer ball back and forth, their little legs pumping furiously as they ran through the piles of leaves. They were beautiful. Leo had Marcus's nose. Sam had his chin. But their eyes were all Hinnie. "Pass it to me, Sam!" Leo shouted, his voice high and clear. "I'm trying," Sam yelled back, tripping over his own feet and tumbling into a heap of leaves. Marcus took an involuntary step forward from behind the tree. His instinct was to rush over to pick the boy up, to brush the dirt off his knees. He wanted to say, "I'm your father. I'm the one who gave you life." But then he saw Julian move. Before Sam could even start to cry, Julian was there. He had moved with a speed that spoke of constant vigilance. He scooped Sam up effortlessly, swinging him into the air. "Whoa there, champion." Julian grinned. "Did the ground attack you?" Sam giggled, wrapping his small arms around Julian's neck. "The leaves are slippery, Papa J. Papa J." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow to the chest. It winded him. He grabbed the rough bark of the oak tree to steady himself. "Papa!" Julian brushed the leaves off Sam's jacket and set him down, ruffling his dark curls. "Go on. Mum is watching. Show her that goal." Marcus watched as the boys ran back to the game, glancing at Julian for approval every few seconds. They didn't know who Marcus was. To them, he was invisible. He was a biological necessity that had ceased to exist the moment he walked out of that hospital room. Heine was watching the boys, but suddenly her gaze shifted. She felt eyes on her. A mother's intuition. She looked across the park, scanning the tree line. Her eyes stopped on the oak tree. Marcus froze. He wanted to run, but his feet were lead. He stepped out from the shadow, fully revealing himself. He looked a wreck. He was unshaven, his face gaunt and hollow. He wore a cheap windbreaker that didn't fit right, and a baseball cap pulled low to hide his shame. He held a plastic bag containing his meager lunch. Their eyes met across the 50 yards of manicured grass. For a moment, the sounds of the park, the laughter of children, the distant traffic, the rustling leaves seemed to fade away. It was just the two of them, the woman who had died and come back to life, and the man who had lived only to lose everything. Marcus waited for her anger. He expected her to scream, to call the police, to point at him and laugh. He deserved it. But Hinnie didn't scream. She didn't look angry. She looked pitying. She looked at him the way one looks at a ghost or a tragedy on the news. Sad, but distant. Julian noticed her stillness. "Heine." "What is it?" Henny didn't look away from Marcus. He's here. Julian turned. His body instantly tensed. He stood up, placing himself physically between Heine and the distant figure of Marcus. It was a primal gesture, the alpha protecting his pack. "I'll call security," Julian said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's violating the restraining order." Heine reached out and took Julian's hand. "No, don't." "Heine, Look at him, Julian," she said softly. "Look at him." Julian paused. He looked at his former rival. He saw the cheap clothes, the slump of the shoulders, the plastic bag. He saw a man who had been stripped to the bone. "He's suffering," Julian muttered. "He's realizing," Heine corrected. "Let him watch. Let him see exactly what he traded for a stock price." Marcus stood there, trembling. He saw them talking. He saw the unity between them. He realized that Julian hadn't just taken his wife. He had healed her. He hadn't just taken his sons. He was raising them to be men Marcus never could have been. Leo, the more curious of the twins, stopped chasing the ball. He noticed the adults staring. He looked toward the tree. The little boy squinted. He took a few steps toward Marcus. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. "This is it," he thought wildly. "Blood calls to blood. He knows me." Marcus took a hesitant step forward. He raised a hand, a weak, trembling wave. A tear leaked out of his eye and trailed down his dirty cheek. "Hi," Marcus whispered, though the boy couldn't hear him. Leo tilted his head. He looked at the strange, sad man in the funny hat. Then the boy turned around and ran back to Julian. "Papa," Leo chirped, tugging on Julian's sweater. "Who is that man? Why is he crying?" Marcus held his breath. He waited for Julian to say, "That's your father." He waited for the truth that would shatter their world. Julian looked at Marcus one last time. There was no triumph in Julian's eyes anymore. The war was over. There was no need to crush a bug that was already stepped on. Julian knelt down to Leo's eye level. He smoothed the boy's hair back. "That," Julian said softly, his voice carrying on the wind just enough for Marcus to hear. "That's just a stranger, Leo. Just a sad stranger. Just a stranger." The words severed the last thread holding Marcus together. "Oh," Leo said, losing interest immediately. "Can we get a pretzel? I'm hungry." "Yes," Heine said, standing up and wrapping her arm around Julian's waist. "Let's get pretzels. Then we'll go home and watch a movie." "Yay!" The boys cheered. Marcus watched them turn their backs on him. He watched Julian pick up Sam. He watched Heine hold Leo's hand. They walked away down the winding path, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. They looked like a painting of the perfect family. They didn't look back. Not once. Marcus stood alone in the darkening shadow of the tree. The wind picked up, cutting through his thin jacket, biting into his skin. The plastic bag in his hand rustled. He looked down at his hands. They were empty. He had spent his life grasping for gold, for power, for legacy. He had clenched his fists so tight around his ambition that he had crushed the only things that actually mattered. He sank to his knees on the cold, hard ground. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty air. "Heine, I'm sorry." But there was no one to hear him. The park was emptying out. The sun had set on Marcus Thorne. He stayed there until the street lights flickered on, casting long, distorted shadows across the grass. Then slowly, painfully, he stood up. He turned toward the subway station that would take him back to his empty apartment and tomorrow to a prison cell. He walked away a man who had conquered the world, only to find himself exiled from the only kingdom that mattered. and that, my friends, is the tragic end of Marcus Thorne. He was a man so obsessed with the cost of everything that he forgot the value of anything. He learned the hardest lesson of all: while you can buy a house, you cannot buy a home. You can buy a clock, but you cannot buy time. And you can buy a companion, but you cannot buy love. Marcus thought he was discarding a burden when he left Heine and the twins to die, but he was actually throwing away his own salvation. Julian Sterling didn't just win the business war, he won at life, proving that a real man doesn't run. When things get hard, he stays. He fights and he protects. In the end, karma didn't miss. It just waited for the perfect moment to ensure that the man who wanted to be alone at the top got exactly what he wished for. Wow, what a roller coaster of emotions. I hope this story touched your heart and reminded you of what truly matters in life. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more dramatic tales of betrayal, revenge, and sweet redemption, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Julian's shoes? Would you have saved your rival's wife? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We upload brand new dramas every single day. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.